Hello, Shearith Israel. It's me, Rabbi David, and I'm here with my brothers, with Ethan and Corey. And in this time of complete uncertainty, in this time of challenge, in this time of just deep questioning, we thought it'd be interesting to come together and share where we're at with what's going on in Israel and in the world. And for me, when moments of challenge arrive, I always think about how can I make space for not only what it is that I'm thinking or what I'm feeling, but also for those that are around me. And I find so easily and so meaningfully to be able to do that with my brothers who we are in constant communication, whether it's sending around a meme and a joke and a fun tweet, or it's asking how it is that we're processing and handling various things that are going on in our own worlds. So I invited my brothers, Ethan and Corey, to be with us for a few minutes so that we can have a conversation where we're at within our own lives and our communities, within our Jewish lives and our Jewish communities, and just hear from one another, and we'll see where this goes. This is uncut, this is raw, this is real. And as you can look and see by the looks on our faces, we're tired, just like everybody else. So I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves and share a little bit about where they're at and what they're doing. And Ethan, why don't you start?
This is like the real world. Hi, everybody. I'm Ethan. I'm based in Kansas City, and I serve as the Director of Jewish Experiences for the Jewish Federation and the Jewish Community Center of Kansas City. And amongst the many, many things, like all three of us do with our communities, I have a privilege of working with our Israeli community specifically, and also with our community Shlicha. And I wanted to share a little bit about what that's been like, which is to say it is so hard to walk in every single morning and see my incredible 22-year-old Shlicha who's been in Kansas City for just over a month. And every morning, the first thing I do is say, did you sleep last night? And I know the answer is going to be no, but I ask because it's the right thing to do. And usually the conversation veers into just a number of how many people she's heard about overnight that she can't get a hold of or that she's lost. And it is just raw and gut wrenching. And it's hard to find the strength every day to help show up for somebody else. But it's even more so when you know the weight that is on her shoulders, and thank God her family's okay, and most of her friends are safe. But it's been a gut wrenching few weeks. I know for Corey and David as well. It's just been kind of trying to find perspective and trying to find meaning. And there's a lot of perspective, but I don't know how much of it is comforting or helping us make sense of what's happening, because I don't know how much sense there is to make of what's happening. But again, the strength that we find is within each other, and having the ability to hold that space with each other.
Thank you, Corey.
Hello, Shearith community. Nice to be with you. Thanks, David, for creating this space for us and for the community. I'm the rabbi at Kodesh Congregation in Chevy, Maryland, just outside of DC. I had a powerful experience on Friday last week, just before Shabbat. I was invited to join several people in leading a tekes, a ceremony at the Lincoln Memorial. And just in between where the reflecting pool is, in that space where Dr. King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. And when you walk into the space where the Lincoln Memorial is, there was set a beautiful table for Shabbat. It's inspired by an art exhibition that was created in Tel Aviv called The Empty Table. And it's made its appearances in different places around the world. And as you enter into this space, you see hundreds of empty chairs of all different shapes and sizes for adults and for children and for infants that are really around this beautiful Shabbat table with challah and fine china, and all of those people are missing. It was a symbolic representation of the more than 220 people still being held hostage by Hamas. And just being there with those individuals who are in Washington to lobby to our leaders, to help them bring their loved ones home, to be together in solidarity, to sing together before Shabbat, almost like we were recreating the experience that many of you have probably heard about or even participated in on the coast of the Mediterranean in Tel Aviv, where people will often pray on Friday evening, and just really be there to hear stories and to remind ourselves that numbers don't truly capture the essence of every individual human being who has been lost, murdered, or still being held in captivity, or those who are in pain, reeling from the awful trauma that was October 7th. And to be able to humanize it in a particular way through this moment was quite beautiful and sacred. I was thinking about that image of seeing the table through the lens of Avram this past Shabbat, where God tells him to go El Haaretz Asher Areka, to a place that I will show you. Avram has to leave it all behind to go to a place that he actually cannot fathom. He can't try to grasp what this place will be and what it will look like. You know, some of the commentators imagine that he knew it was the land of Israel, even though he didn't know exactly what that looked like. And others seem to suggest that he was going off on this adventure that could really take him anywhere. And I think a lot of us, myself in particular, are having a hard time looking up and figuring out what comes next. I just feel overwhelmed by the numbness and the pain, and feel paralyzed and overwhelmed by fear because I don't know what's coming next. And it feels like it's just getting worse and worse by the day. And I could imagine maybe that Avram felt something similar, that he looks up and has absolutely no sense of what's to come. I came across this beautiful teaching from a mentor of mine, of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he says that this phrase, El Haaretz Asher Areka, to go to a place that I will show you, is really about discovering the essence and the core of who Avram is. I will reveal you to you. Like, you'll really get a sense of understanding who you are in this process. And I wonder if that's part of the challenge of this moment. Will we be able to understand who we are in continuing to show up in the pain and the trauma and the heartache, and also in whatever the steps are that we take moving forward, even if we can barely see just in front of our own 2 feet? And as I looked up and saw the empty table there just before Shabbat, I also looked past the table for a moment to the space where Dr. King was decades ago, preaching about his dream and about hope and about freedom. And I still yearn to get there. That's the place that I hope I will see at some point. And it's in the background of the emptiness of what's before me. So in some ways, maybe it's just the metaphor that I have to keep looking, that I have to keep lifting my eyes, that I have to keep finding a way to know that I'm doing this together with other people, with my fellow Jews and with our brothers and sisters in Israel, and with hopefully many allies, with the parents and loved ones of those who still have family members in captivity, the soldiers on the front lines, those who mourn. But I have to keep looking up in some way, and hopefully I'll figure out what to do next, or at least to be able to see that we're all somehow together trying to figure it out with one another.
So I'll just ask, just for everybody's own knowledge, where are you seeking your support? Where are you seeking your inspiration? Where are you seeking your source of comfort and strength in these times? Whether it's something you're listening to, things that you've read, you're both very well read and listened to, and I know we share a lot of those articles on a regular basis, and oftentimes we'll introduce one another to something else that we've read or heard that's, we're able to sit with in this moment. So I'm curious, what have you read, what have you listened to that you would encourage other people to take a moment to read and listen to if they're able? Ethan?
Yeah, I think a few things have really been helpful. One is, I'm a former Hillel professional, and working on a college campus right now is on the front lines of a different thing. It kind of felt before we got to this weekend that the last week has kind of felt like a bit of a lull. And what we've seen is that the rhetoric on college campuses has continued to become more and more inflamed. And reaching out to my friends who still work on campuses to listen and to check in with them. And, there's a lot of strength to be drawn from our friends in the field who work in different spaces. So that to me has been not reassuring, but, it has been helpful to know that all of us are being called upon think about how our communities are going to function both now and I think for the long haul. I don't make any illusions of the fact that this is not going to be something that ends quickly. And so we're going to need to figure out how to sustain our communities and one another in a variety of ways. And so that's been something I've done. I think I've been really privileged that in my work, I get to work both with Jewish professionals and with community members. And so seeing how the community is responding and holding space for people and understanding that it looks different, that there is a way to find a little bit of joy in attending preschool Shabbat on Friday morning, like is really, it feels good for the soul. It feels good for the neshama. And then also being able to answer questions. I work with a lot of folks who are not Jewish, and being able to answer questions and help understand both the complex political situation, but also to be able to say and find a lot of comfort in saying it is actually okay to say to people who are asking you questions, whether you're a student, whether you work in a Jewish organization, whether you're Jewish or not, there is validity in holding the opinion that what you're seeing on TV is not the entire story, and you don't have to go out and defend or explain or educate right now because it is feeling so raw. And at the same time, there have been so many incredible podcasts and articles and reporting that we've seen that's been helpful. I will say Rabbi Bradley Artson, who I know is a close teacher of David's and of Corey's as well, wrote a beautiful, there's been a lot of letter to my non-Jewish friend articles the past couple of weeks, but his that came out this week really hit home in a way that gave perspective of how we both look internally to our own Jewish community and also how we look externally, and remember that there are other people who are not Jewish who this is impacting in a deep way, and that our humanity and our sense of support for all people and our empathy for all people is important, especially as I see kind of the degrading situation in a lot of places where we've lost the ability to talk to each other, which is one of the hardest parts here, is that we struggle to talk to each other on a human level. And so we talk past one another, and it tends to turn vitriolic in the worst cases. And so his article really resonated. And then a couple of other things I've seen from some writers. As a student of literature, it's been really wonderful to get to have some perspective from David Grossman and from Edgar Keret and so many of these wonderful Israeli artists and authors who are able to, just try and make sense of a moment in time, even though that moment might feel fleeting. And then one, just for me personally, I have a good friend and fraternity brother who makes a podcast every day about the news. And while he is nationally and internationally recognized as being a wonderful news, a reporter, listening to his voice as a person who I used to get to talk to in college is really comforting, that it feels like somebody is telling me what's going on. I know that in that moment it's true, and then 10 minutes later it might not be, but it provides a little bit of solace in knowing that I'm listening to somebody who I trust try and help me understand and get through that half an hour of the day before we move on to the next thing. So I would say those are some of the folks, but also just there's such an abundance of things that are out there right now. So I also always appreciate what the two of you send, especially, when it's something that distracts us for a minute too.
And Corey, where are you at with reading and listening and trying to keep up with everything else?
I just want to acknowledge for a second that in this particular instance, reading and listening may actually make things worse. It is overwhelming, the amount of material coming out. I feel a little bit like every Jewish organization ever created in history has just decided that we will send an email every day. And it's a lot to wade through. So there's a bit of anxiety, or maybe even a lot of anxiety, and kind of this overwhelming feeling about just trying to sift through all of the content that's out there, not to mention the videos and the personal opinions and things like that you can read on social media. I'm looking at a lot of different things, and I'm really trying hard to read a lot from different viewpoints, because I'm curious both what people on one side and on the other side are saying. I'm curious about how things are actually being spun in a way that is actually more about a particular goal in mind and not as much about actually trying to say what's going on. Anyone who's ever really studied or engaged in conversation around the conflict in the Middle East, specifically around Israel and the existential threats, has to understand that this is a conversation of complexity that requires tremendous nuance. And if you think you can just take a story and spin it because that's the flavor of the moment, you're completely misunderstanding what is actually happening, and why this moment has escalated the way that it has, not just on the ground, but also in media spaces. So that would be just a first question to perhaps ask of yourself: what bias am I bringing to the table? And also, am I really probing for the deeper questions that are going on underneath the surface? I read a lot of Hartman. I listen to, for heaven's sake, the podcast regularly. I find that Rabbi Daniel Hartman and Rabbi Yossi Klein Halevi are kind of great with each other, and they're very human. In addition to like bringing Torah to the center, they kind of try to unpack what's happening. I'll read anything from the New York Times, understanding its bias, and the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, and the Times of Israel, and the Jerusalem Post, and whatever I can get my hands on. And I also read a lot of what my congregants are reading. I actually have my congregants send me articles that they find compelling or that they find abhorrent, because I want to understand how the community is perceiving, receiving information in this time. I actually spent a lot of time talking to Israelis. We have an after-school Israeli program. We also have a shlicha in our community that we partner with this after-school Israeli program. And I really want to hear from them. Like, what are they sitting with? How are they experiencing this? What's going on for their families who are there and on the ground? And I think being able to open ourselves up to do more listening in this case is quite powerful, both of Israelis and those who are there, as well as to each other. Like, this is one of those places where there's already too much judgment that exists. And if we could maybe just sit with people a little bit longer and hear what they're thinking about, what they're listening to, what they're reading, that might be important. On Shabbat, over the last 2 weeks, we've been reading the names of all of the soldiers who are connected to our congregation. We have over 100 now, plus all of those who are in captivity connected to the congregation. We have about a half dozen, and anyone connected who were killed. And we've been trying to ask more people to share not just the names, but who those people are, and what's the stories that surround them. Because I think in some ways that also kind of gets to the humanizing of what's actually happening. And I would say the last thing for me is I'm looking for Torah. I'm both reading Torah, and I am not just like what's in the cycle, but reading things that my colleagues are publishing or that's out there in the world, because I'm curious how our vast wealth of knowledge and tradition can guide us. Just as an example, I know that many colleagues, myself included, use the metaphors of aninut and avilut, of what happens when someone dies, and then you go through the process for burial and mourning, shiva and the like. For me, it was kind of being thrust between aninut and avilut, back and forth between the moments of initial shock and grief and numbness into what a mourning period could look like. And I'm aware that a week from tonight, actually today's Sunday, a week from today is Shloshim. It's 30 days since October 7th. And I've just been thinking a lot about how does our tradition guide us, right? We don't stop mourning, but our mourning changes. We don't stop feeling, but the way we experience emotion changes. So I'm trying to find new connections in sources I'm familiar with each week, in the Parsha, in the Torah reading, in just the ebbs and flows of Jewish life cycle that can anchor me to where I am in the moment. Because in some ways, I'm going through my own grief, just as you are. And I think there is power in a tradition that we have held fast to for millennia. And we shouldn't somehow abandon that. Hadar has been great with that. Hartman's been great with that. I'm connected to the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, also have been great with offering Torah for the moment, not to mention some mindfulness and quiet, which is helpful. So this is perhaps an opportunity to go back to our sources and not overlook them, because there's tremendous wisdom even amidst the chaos.
And Gore, you mentioned this arc of from aninut, this period of liminality between someone dying and what comes next with Shiva, with burial, and then going up that mountain, so to say, with Shloshim, with this period of the intensity of the grieving and the mourning and the effects that it has taken and had upon us. And we kind of start to move into a different period, which is in mourning terms, the 11 months. And this coming week, we read Parsha Vayera, in which starts out with this incredible act of radical hospitality, of radical openness, and of Haknasat Orchim, with Abraham opening his home, his tent, to these ministering angels who come to give him good news, who come to pay Bichur Cholim, to visit the sick. And at the end of this week's Parsha, we have this climactic story, which we've already read once this year, of the Akedah, of the binding of Isaac, one of the most theological, emotional, and just challenging stories that we have in our Bible. And I was thinking earlier today, you were talking about words of Torah, and I was thinking earlier today, there's this beautiful piece from the Kotzker Rebbe, who lived in the 17th and 18th century, 18th and 19th century, in Poland, the Hasidic master. And he asked the question, what is the most challenging part of the Akedah? And one of his students says, of course, it's the fact that Abraham takes Isaac, puts him on the altar, and is about ready to kill him. Thank God it doesn't happen. And the Kotzker Rebbe says, no, actually, that is secondary. The hardest part, says the Kotzker, is what happens when Abraham and Isaac descend the mountain. When they come down the mountain and they attempt to return to some sort of normalcy. They attempt to return to the realities of life with all of the baggage, with all the tsuris, with all the emotion, with all the heartache, with everything that they had carrying with them prior. They now have to return to life with all of that weighing on them. And I think for me right now, the piece that I'm sitting with in particular is I would love to see what it looks like on the other side of the mountain. I would love to see what it looks like when we return to some sort of state of calm, of shleimut, of normalcy. But I'm afraid to get to that point because of what it is that we're going to carry with us. We all carry our own baggage in every way, and no matter the circumstance and the situation. And I think in this particular case, because everybody is in such a different place of grief, of sorrow, of anger, of frustration, of all the different elements of emotion, we're not yet prepared for what will happen when we come out on the other side, whatever that other side might be. And for me, it's both nerve-wracking. It's also, to an extent, just calming to know that I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm going to be together with everybody else in that unanswered state, that liminal moment, that aninut, so to say, that you were going back and forth with. And so that's what I've been thinking about this week, and in the last couple of hours in particular, as we approach this really challenging story in our Torah reading, which we come to twice a year. Once on Rosh Hashanah, when we start our year, and then a few weeks later when we read it in Parashat Vayera, of not much has changed from Rosh Hashanah to now, except for this year, where everything has changed. And there's just so many unknown variables that we're all sitting with. And I think, as you both eloquently and accurately said, it's okay that we don't know. It's okay that we don't know what's coming next. It's okay that we don't know how to process, how to respond, how to create that space for us to be able to be in this moment. So that's what I'm sitting with right now as well. But if you have both of you have any further or last comments before we wrap up, I'm sure we've already gone way over what people are going to be listening to. But if you have any other final thoughts.
But if you really like it, we can make a podcast now. I guess to that exact point, David, it right away reminds me of the week before, the week between, first and second half of Sukkot Yantif, I got to teach a class on the memification of Jewish life, which is a topic I'm like endlessly fascinated by. And I talked about the great German scholar Erich Auerbach's theory of mimesis, which is how things are represented in Western literature. And actually, he talks about the very first example he gives is of the Akedah. And what he describes is that the Akedah is a story that we continue to return to because it is one of what he calls universal history. It's something that you can continue to come back to, and it seems to be represented in our history time and time again. Whether it is the Akedah or the lesson of the Akedah kind of repeated, which is the idea of mimesis. Something's mimetic is something that is repeated. It happens over and over again. But there's something interesting that I think is worth noting that Auerbach speaks to within this idea of universal history, which is in thinking about what's on the other side of the mountain and thinking about what comes next. It feels like for the last several years, we've lived in this time where we've always said everything is unprecedented, like precedented times would be wonderful. What Auerbach seems to suggest is that there is room within that universal history to remember that we come out of it. So right now, while we don't know what it's going to look like, what he reminds us is that you always come to that point. You come to that point changed, but like there is another side to it that you will eventually arrive at. And there's something, while not confirming, it is affirming and validating that we will get there eventually. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't think any of us do. But also it mimics me to go back to that point where I've been trying to sit with this because this is Israel, as I go back to that idea of like hope. It's not exactly satisfying at the moment, but it's there. It's always there. And so I think that there is a lot of merit in remembering that we always have come out on the other side. And so universal history suggests we're going to in some way. I don't know what it will look like, but we'll get there. And we'll get there changed, but we'll get there. So, to find a little bit of solace or comfort or just, validation that we'll get there is at least something nice to sit with at the moment when it doesn't feel like there's a lot else to sit with that's satisfying.
Corey, final thoughts?
You both talked about the Akedah. I guess I have to talk about the Akedah. I'll just say that one of my favorite phrases of that story is the phrase "Vayelchu shnehem yachdav," that Abraham and Yitzchak, despite all of what's about to happen, and I think probably they know what's about to happen, it says "Vayelchu shnehem yachdav," they walk together. And I think that's a pretty powerful statement, both of what we need to do now. We need to keep walking together. And even when we figure out what it means to come down the mountain, we still have to walk together, right? Even when it's messier and more complex and perhaps more painful, and when we still don't really know what's coming next, that's the moment where you actually have to hold on tighter and keep walking together. So maybe that's another message of what we need right now. We shouldn't let go of each other's arms and hands, and instead hold on tighter because we need each other to be able to navigate whatever might follow. We should be blessed to continue walking together.
So I want to end with somewhat of a kavanah that the Israeli author Etgar Keret, and if you've never read Etgar Keret, phenomenal storyteller, just absolutely incredible storyteller. He's been writing these little vignettes, and this one got translated into English and made its rounds throughout the course of social media the last few days. And it writes, it's called The Signs of Life. And that's the kavanah. Now close your eyes and try to stop being angry. Try to stop raging at all those who deserve your righteous fury. Close your eyes and allow yourself just for a moment to simply feel the pain, to hesitate, to be confused, to feel sorrow and remorse. You still have your whole life to spend persecuting, avenging, and reckoning. But for now, just close your eyes and look inward, like a satellite hovering over a disaster zone, searching for signs of life. A lot has been taken away from you, but you're still a human being. Wounded, bloodied, angry, hurting, frightened, drowning in sorrow, but still human. Take a deep breath and try to remember that feeling, because you know that a minute from now, when you open your eyes, it'll be gone. So together, may we breathe one day at a time, and may we all walk, as Corey said, and we walk together from this side of the mountain to the other side. Guys, thank you for being with me now, always, for having this space that we can share together, for being my chevrutot, and for being my brothers. I appreciate both of you. And if you like what you've seen here, we can bring the show on the road and come to Atlanta or a city near you at some point in time. It wouldn't be a Helfand Brothers gathering without a little bit of levity. So to you both, I say thank you and much love to you both. And hopefully we see each other again and under good times and good circumstances. So thanks.
Amen. Lots of love.
Thank you.